Chairman of the Orange County Board of Supervisors. Today, the Orange County Healthcare Agency reported 51 new cases of COVID-19 and 3 new deaths. Our hearts go out to the families of those that were lost. This brings our total to 1,425 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 25 deaths to date. Despite the fluctuation of cases we have seen in Orange County, the number of those hospitalized with COVID-19 remain comparatively low. As of today, we have 138 hospitalizations and 68 in ICU, and we are seeing a stabilization of the number of cases in this area. I understand that many Orange County residents are currently dealing with economic and emotional issues related to COVID-19. Please note that your county is working hard to assist you during this time and in the months to come. We understand that many of you are looking for resources and even possibly ways to assist your neighbors. The county has launched a comprehensive list of resources to better assist Orange County's residents. That website may be found at covid19info.ocgov.com. On the website, you will find information about relief for small businesses and support for individuals of all ages. Please note that this website will be expanded and updated by the county to better assist you. In addition to the website, I have launched a business ad hoc committee with Supervisor Don Wagner to help assist businesses and during the recovery phase of Orange County response. You will be hearing more from myself and Supervisor Wagner in the coming weeks as we work in numerous business leaders from across Orange County. I also wanted to touch on events happening in Washington, D.C. We saw today that jobless claims continue rising, and the Paycheck Protection Program is now out of money. I hear from small business owners every single day who call and tell me of their struggles, how their employees are struggling. This is real. I am asking Congress to please set aside partisan politics and pass an extension of the Paycheck Protection Program immediately. I also wanted to inform you all about a wonderful development that occurred yesterday. The Korean American community generously donated 2,000 KN95 masks to Orange County. This was followed by donations of over 14,000 face masks and other PPE donated by TOC Foundation, the Elegant Culture and Tradition Center, and the Chinese American CPA Association. All these vital PPE will be going to our first responders and health workers that are working so hard every day to keep the residents of Orange County safe. This is time for sharing and giving. We are all in this together. I want to thank you all of the organizations that generously donated this needed PPE. Sheriff Don Barnes today and District Attorney Todd Spitzer are also joining us. They will be providing an update on bail and the lower rates of calls for domestic violence and child abuse. Again, I appreciate you all joining us today and would welcome Sheriff Don Barnes.
Thank you very much. Don Barnes, Sheriff Coroner with the County of Orange. I'd like to update the county and the media on several of the operations we have in the community, some of the issues we are facing, and update you on our jail operations. Currently in patrol operations, the Orange County Sheriff's Department offers direct patrol services to approximately 1/4 of the county's 3.2 million residents. As a result of COVID-19 over the last month, we've seen our calls into dispatch reduced by 17%. Our calls for service, those are calls in which deputies respond to and address issues within the community, are down 36%. And that's mostly the result of some procedural changes that we have implemented more than a month ago. We are currently handling a lot of calls that don't require face-to-face interaction over the phone or through the internet in ways that will reduce social dealing with the public face-to-face. Unfortunately, the last several days and weeks have seen an increase in some categories that are concerning to me. Domestic violence calls have increased 25%. Calls for family disputes have increased 24%. And child custody dispute calls have increased 30%. As always, when these issues arise, we want you to seek out and get help and intervention wherever possible. I have some numbers that I'd like to share with you that are available in the event you are facing any of these circumstances. First and foremost is the Orange County Child Abuse Registry. That number is 1-800-207-4464. Orange County Adult Protective Services Hotline, 800-451-5155. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, 800-799-7233. The National Human Trafficking Hotline, 888-373-7888. Calling Behavioral Health Orange County at OC Links, that's OCLINKS. Access to resources throughout 211 OC by dialing directly 211. And you can find additional information on the FACT website, Families and Communities Working Together, that's consisting of 15 county family resource centers at www.factoc.org. I remain concerned about the adverse effect these stay-at-home orders has on those who are vulnerable to domestic violence and also child abuse. Domestic violence sheltering options are available for victims and also children that they may have. Please call and report abuse and always dial 911 if you are in immediate danger, and we will respond. Pertaining to our jail operations, to date we have 24 of the inmates entrusted to our care in medical isolation. Medical isolation is for those who are exhibiting symptomology, flu-like symptoms, and are then isolated from the general public. 13 of those 24 have tested positive for COVID-19, and one test is pending. To date, we have had 17 of the inmates entrusted to our care test positive. 4 have recovered fully and have been removed from medical isolation, and 29 tests have come back negative. All inmates who have been diagnosed with COVID-19 have been treated on site within our jails, and none have required hospitalization. We have 375 inmates in our care who are quarantined. This includes 96 who are new bookings and will be quarantined from the general population within the for the first 7 days of their time in jail. This is done as a precautionary measure only and a safeguard from those who might be unknowingly bringing COVID-19 into the jail and isolating them from the rest of the jail population. Those in quarantine still have access to all services within the jail, day room and other privileges. They're just not being commingled with the main jail population as a precautionary measure. And we have had 3 of our staff members working in the jail, deputy sheriffs, who have tested positive for COVID-19. I'm happy to report that one of those deputies has fully recovered and is returning to work. We anticipate one of the others to recover fully soon and return to work, and the other is doing well with mild to moderate symptoms. We continue to address behavioral health issues within our jail, and I mention this because it's important to know that all of the medical and psychiatric treatment continues for those entrusted to our care. I've shared this information previously that 40% of the inmates in our care have a daily nexus to mental health treatment, and 1 in 5 inmates in our jail are self-declared as being homeless. That's important because as those process through our jail and are being released, we connect them to services post-release and afford them opportunities as they re-enter into the community. Our jail population has decreased significantly over the last month. As of March 7th, our population of the jail was approximately 5,300 inmates. Today, the population was 3,309, representing a decrease of 38%. That is 1/3 less than it was at the end of February. of this year. Since March 28th, 385 sentenced low-level inmates have been released 30 days prior to the end of their sentence, and some 60 days prior if they were identified as being medically at risk by the healthcare agency. The reduction of our jail's population is the result of many factors. First, the limited release of low-level offenders I mentioned previously, 385, releases accomplished by the court and through attrition as a result of reduced remands to custody from the closure of the courts. I want to acknowledge the exceptional work being done by our courts, the district attorney, the public defender, and my staff who have worked to ensure due process occurs judiciously, including the handling of bail releases. From the time the courts closed on March 19th to April 10th, the number of hearings held via chambers or via stipulation was 10,245. That's more than 10,000 hearings that continue to occur even though the courts have been closed for some time. Last week, the Judicial Council, through the Chief Justice, issued a revised bail schedule as a result of the COVID-19 emergency. In essence, bail was reduced to 0 for almost all misdemeanors and felonies. As of last Friday, the courts, under new bail schedules, considered the release of 66 defendants, granting the release of 49 and denying the release of 17. I do believe the State Judicial Council went too far in their recent order of 0 bail or no bail for misdemeanors and almost all felonies. Every county is different, and every county has different challenges and constraints. Consequently, there is no one best solution that satisfies each of the state's 58 counties. These decisions should be occurring locally based on current jail needs. No one should be released beyond what is absolutely necessary to create capacity to mitigate risk inside the jails, while at the same time protecting the safety of the communities we collectively serve. Most concerning to me is that the order remains valid and extends the 90 days beyond the declared emergency being lifted. That is not only unnecessary, it is blatantly irresponsible. These release measures should only be employed to address emergency conditions, and only during the period that the emergency exists, not one day longer. Although the government code allows me broad authority to release any individual entrusted to my care during this declared emergency, I will not release any offender who I believe poses a serious risk to the public based on their current charges or their past criminal histories. These releases of low-level offenders who are already nearing the end of their sentences is being done to create necessary capacity, allowing us to continue to house the most serious offenders. Closing, I want to leave you with one last comment, and it's not lost on me that these stay-at-home orders are impacting the livelihood of tens of thousands of Orange County residents. It is easy for those of us in government who are still employed or those classified as essential businesses to implore people to stay at home. I understand the stresses you are facing, and I thank you for the sacrifices you are making. The Sheriff's Department is committed to doing its part to assist with the reopening of businesses and returning our community to the thriving Orange County we have grown to appreciate now more than ever. With that, I'll turn it over to our District Attorney, Todd Spitzer.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. It's such an honor to be here today. This is a very, very difficult time, and I really do want to commend, I spoke at the Board of Supervisors this last Tuesday. I do want to publicly commend your government leaders. The work that they're doing is unbelievable. Dr. Quick, who is here not speaking unless asked questions, the work that she is doing as our our public health officer is phenomenal. Chairwoman Steele, her leadership on trying to save lives and inform the public is incredibly commendable. And Frank Kim, who is off camera but also here, and he and his staff are doing phenomenal work. Irrespective of the fact that I think the County of Orange is performing better than any other county in the United States, The fact of the matter is, today even, when I went to get something to eat at lunch, there's a closed business next door, and the shop owner is there, and he employs 8 people at one shop and 7 people at the other shop. There's 15 people out of work who are not getting a paycheck. I indicated last week when I spoke and I talked about certain subjects that one of the lessons we're probably going to learn as a result of these stay-at-home orders is that we're keeping people too close together, unfortunately, who are acting out in bad ways, specifically elder abuse and child abuse. And obviously there's a lot of potential sexual abuse in those situations. The sheriff reported some numbers today that I think you better pay attention to, and they're alarming. And I know we have the press on this call, and I do want to thank the press as well, because your coverage of this incident has been second to none of reporting that I've seen in my particular lifetime. And many of you are working in outlets where you're providing free coverage because you think it's such an important public service, and it is. And in an industry that's struggling like the news profession, especially print, I think it's phenomenal what the Orange County Register is doing in other outlets. It's our hats are off to you. I'm going to talk briefly about a subject I talked about last week, which is price gouging. I want to talk about elder and child abuse. I kind of covered that, but I want to emphasize some points there. And then I'm going to talk to you about what's happening in the jails and the courts. Well, actually the courts. So let's cover price gouging. Just as a refresher, I spent a lot of time on this last week, but in a nutshell, if the price you're seeing on the shelf for a particular commodity exceeds 10% of what the price was at that location where you used to buy it, that is a violation of state law under these current emergency orders. Where it gets a little tricky is, as I was driving here to Santa Ana for this event, there are people standing literally in the street on 4th Street selling homemade masks in the middle of traffic. And so those individuals are selling masks for $5. Those masks don't cost $5, but those people, I'm going to guess, have never been in that business before. If a person is selling a commodity and have never been in that business before, they can charge a 50% premium and not be in violation of the governor's orders today. And then lastly, Senator Tom Umberg is carrying legislation sponsored by myself and the San Diego District Attorney Summer Stephan to now make it, in the event of a future pandemic, that you cannot raise prices greater than 10% if you get into the business of selling a commodity, even as an entrepreneur where you never sold that commodity before. If you have any questions, I just want you to call the DA hotline. I set up a scam hotline. The number is 714-834-3482. And it's right on my homepage, orangecountyocdistrictattorney.com. If you're confused, just Google Todd Spitzer and my website will come up. Let me talk about elder and child abuse. As I already indicated, the numbers you're seeing by the sheriff in terms of calls for service and other investigative leads is very, very troubling. Elder abuse reporting had been down 62%. Child abuse had been down 44%. And the reason is because those populations have interacted with people like the elderly at banks or kids in school with teachers or counselors. Those are what we call mandatory reporters. They're legally obligated to report suspicious activity that they think is leading to abuse. Given the fact that elderly are not going to banks because they're sheltered at home as a vulnerable population, and kids aren't going to school, you are the only ones that are seeing these individuals in public places. So I'm asking you today as members of the public to report abuse, and the numbers are shown here behind me with websites. This information is readily available on the internet. I would much rather have you call and report suspicious activity and be wrong than fail to report it and have something terrible happen to one of these members of our vulnerable community. Let me talk about the courts. I am just so proud and pleased to partner with Sheriff Don Barnes and the chiefs of police in this county. We're the individuals who are charged with frontline public safety. You are used to seeing us as the individuals responsible for public safety. The public safety we're not used to thinking about is our public health safety. And Dr. Quick and her staff, as I've already acknowledged, and all the members of the healthcare agency are doing a phenomenal job, as well as all the other public health officers throughout our nation. The decisions they're making are very difficult about whether to shelter in place, whether to have to wear masks, all these restrictive activities. But what the sheriff and I are also responsible for, he in terms of frontline law enforcement protection, going out and getting calls, my prosecutors are responsible once there's an arrest to determine what charges will be charged, if any, to get protective orders in place to protect that victim from further harm, and to try to keep that person in custody and away from the victim during these very, very difficult times when there's pressure to release people out of our jails. What's happening to all of us, we're all feeling it, okay? We're all at home, we're all congregated together, we're all feeling incredible stresses and pressures most of us have not experienced all at once. And there's going to be a point in time where society cannot handle this amount of pressure and things are going to go badly. What I want to say to Orange County in particular, as opposed to some of the other jurisdictions that I've been following through the news, you are doing a phenomenal job as a county. You've been supportive of our efforts. You've obeyed our efforts. We haven't seen excessive price gouging. We haven't seen successive incidents of civil disobedience at all. But there's going to be a point in time where people's patience is going to grow thin. And now there's a lot of pressure, as we all know, for people to get back to work. And I am hoping, based upon the direction of the Board of Supervisors this week, for further testing for the antibodies, that if we can get more people tested and have the antibodies, then we'll be able to go back, at least some of us may be able to go back and work, which is going to be critical to our public safety. I wanted to emphasize that today, that there's a direct connection between public safety with respect to law enforcement and public health. They are integrally related. Lastly, I want to emphasize this because the sheriff talked about some of the orders to release individuals on bail, zero bail, no bail, that are incredibly dangerous. I want you to appreciate we are in open court. We are litigating cases. Most of the courts are closed, but there are criminal courts open, and we and my prosecutors are either in court in person conducting preliminary hearings, or we're doing it through video conferencing. I want you to appreciate, based upon the judge's orders from the Supreme Court and the Judicial Council, what we're dealing with. We've had two individuals who, one was a alleged child molester we've charged with child molestation, who while they were in trial picking a jury in 2006, fled back to England to escape charges, and we finally got them extradited, and now that person tried to get out on zero bail because he has asthma. We had another individual who stole $3.2 million from a private school here in Orange County, fled to Spain where he's a nationalized citizen, and then when we tried to extradite him, he fled to China to avoid extradition. He tried to get out of custody as well. We have a member of the Mexican mafia who's in our jail, charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and he tried to get out on home electronic confinement. You may have read of a murder in Santa Barbara where two young men were charged with murder, one for shooting the victim with a shotgun, and the other for being an accessory after the fact, wiping down the fingerprints off the shotgun. Accessory after the fact is not one of the included crimes that's covered by the Judicial Council order. This is the ludicrous aspect of what is happening because people have tried to react too quickly, thinking they're protecting the public, but in fact they may be actually jeopardizing the public. On behalf of the Orange County District Attorney's Office and the 800 employees of that office, 600 are working from home, the other 200 are in courts and working in the office. we want to remind you that next week is Crime Victims Week. The whole nation is normally observing crime victims and the sacrifices they and their families have made next week in our nation. We will not be able to do that. So I just want to remind everybody, next week, just say a little bit of prayer for somebody you know who may have been a victim of crime, or understand that this whole big picture we're fighting, we're doing everything we can to make sure we don't have future crime victims in Orange County. So at this time, it's my understanding we'll open it for questions. I'm not the moderator, but I think Mr. Kim is going to come up and take any questions you may have for any of the participants. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Good afternoon. Moderator, do we have questions from the media?
We do have a few questions. Our first question will come from the line of Teresa Walker with Orange County Register. Please go ahead.
Hi. I have a question for Sheriff Barnes in regard to what you were saying about domestic violence. Is that a 25% increase in calls for service specifically?
The 25% increase is specific to calls for service for domestic violence related calls. When taken into consideration the aggregate from last year to this year, that's the comparison for the time period. I believe the time period goes through about last week. Calls for service overall are down, but that particular category of calls for service has increased 25% for domestic violence related calls.
Okay, so is that like to the end of last week, that the period of time?
I don't have the exact date. We can follow up and get that exact period for you, but it is a comparison between two identical time periods year to year. And that's just a response to the calls for service. That's not the actual crimes that would have occurred, but generally that is consistent with the number of calls for service results in a certain number of actual crimes. We can get that information to you after this interview.
Okay, because I was wondering how are those calls handled or resolved, you know, is there a record made, or what's the deputies going out to the homes, or how's that being handled?
Well, each one is tiered. So we have obviously the aggregate of calls for service that come in. There are different call types that fall into category through our computer-aided dispatch based on information collected by our dispatchers based on the type of call. Some will be mitigated at dispatch. Some aren't crimes at all. This is not domestic violence. This is overall. And then we'll dispatch and investigate. Sometimes we may get dispatched to what we believe is a domestic violence call, and it may turn out to be something else, very rarely, but it may be something else. Not every call for domestic violence investigation results in an actual crime. Some of them will result in maybe a report being taken as a domestic violence incident, related incident. Sometimes it might be a verbal domestic violence response. Somebody got in an argument that might have risen to domestic violence if it had progressed, and some will result in actual violations of law. So each one of those are tiered. The 25% that I spoke to specifically was just the increase in call type from last year, same period last year to same period this year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next question will come from the line of Vicky Vargas with Channel 4 News. Please go ahead.
Hi there, thank you. I think the question is probably for Frank Kim, has to do with finances. How much money is the county receiving from the CARES Act, and has it truly received any of that money just on its way?
Sure. The CARES Act, the Treasury web portal opened, I think it was late Monday afternoon. We completed our application by midday on Tuesday, so our application is in for direct funding. Now, the only table that the state that the federal government released was the total amount of funding that would be eligible for the state of California, of which we know that direct applicants can access 45% of that based on population. So the number I'll give you is an estimate. So the current estimate based on census population is that the county of Orange would be eligible for approximately $555 million.
And of that money, because none of the cities here qualify to apply directly, how much will the cities be getting, and how will that be doled out?
Well, so I think what I'll go back to is the funding formula. So what the CARES Act said was for those units of local government that are greater than 500,000 in population, those units of government may apply directly to the Department of Treasury for their own allocation. For those units of government that are below 500,000 in population, those dollars are being sent to the local states. So what I would say is that there are opportunities for the county to work with cities to the extent that they have direct costs associated with a COVID response. And I would also encourage our city partners to file the FEMA claims that they're all eligible for, as well as to work with the state, because the state is getting 55% of those funds. So I think there's opportunities across that whole spectrum of funding resources that become available to all local government of all sizes.
So in theory, the county does not have to give any of its $555 million to the state.
No, I didn't say that. So remember, the guidance for the CARES Act has not been written yet. So we have been informed that the Treasury expects to release those guidance somewhere around April 23rd. So once that guidance is released, that will give us clarity in terms of the type of expenses that are eligible for reimbursement, as well as if there are opportunities to have subrecipients or other activities that I know cities have inquired about in terms of funding.
Okay, and then time frame, when might you see any of that CARES money?
We were informed that approximately 50% of that application grant amount would be released to local government by April 24th. And then the remaining would be sometime after that. So we'll have to wait and see. But as of today, we have not received any funding.
Okay, thank you. And then the lawsuit that Laguna Hills filed against the county, I know you were in court today. Can you update us on that?
Unfortunately, I was not in court, but I did get a message from my staff. Our understanding is the judge asked for additional briefings from the county, and he has continued the matter until Monday at 10 o'clock.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next question, please.
Our next question will come from the line of Spencer Custodio with Voice of OC. Please go ahead.
Hi, I think this question is for the district attorney. Just wondering what measures your family law unit is taking. Maybe is it working with some school districts, the after-school program. Well, those aren't really in, but the existing school districts and other entities around the county on child abuse cases, and also, is there a strategy to kind of increase reporting on elder abuse cases, like maybe checking in on nursing homes or things like that?
Spencer, thank you very much for your question. I think that's a big concern for everybody, is what can we do proactively as opposed to waiting for calls to come in. The Family Protection Unit of the District Attorney's Office is in constant contact with our Social Services Agency, and you've received reports on prior occasions from Deborah Betts from our Social Services Agency. All those social workers are doing a phenomenal job as well, but obviously within certain restrictions in terms of home care visits and the like. I mean, society has really relied in the past on mandatory reporters. That's why the legislature created mandatory reporters, to bring these kinds of issues to our attention. So when people are isolated in their homes behind closed doors, there's things that are going on that if somebody doesn't have the ability to pick up the phone and call 911, or they don't have the wherewithal, there are bad things happening. I mean, look, I am deeply concerned and troubled by the things you don't know. And when we get through this over time, there's going to be situations that have emerged and we learn about that we're all going to be shaking our heads. I mean, if you're in law enforcement, and I've been doing this almost 30 years, your biggest fear is what you could not prevent. That's what we all lose sleep over. And that's what really, really concerns me and scares me. I did get an update about our gang reduction intervention program. And so all these kids that are taking advantage of GRIP, in other words, they have mentors, they're at-risk kids, their parents may have been in gangs, or their parents are living in vulnerable communities, or their parents have worked and been out of the home, they're latchkey kids, things of that sort. We are checking in with all of those via video, Zoom, and other technological opportunities. But we all know that children of lower socioeconomic means don't always have access to the internet in their homes. And I asked about that today, and so if their parents are home, we're communicating with the kid through their parents' cell phone, because most people do have cell phones. So that was a long way of saying, I think everybody's doing the best they can. People work and get into social work, not because of the pay. They get into those professions because they care deeply about the most vulnerable in our society. And those people are doing everything they can to prevent abuse, both against children, the elderly, and any other vulnerable population. I hope that answered your question. I know that I didn't give you the kinds of hard information that I wish I could, but the fact of the matter is that these are still very, very open questions for us as a society.
Thank you.
And our next question will come from the line of Margaret Guerrero with KNX. Please go ahead.
Yeah, also kind of circling back on the hearing today with Laguna Hills, it sounded like the judge was inclined to grant temporary restraining order, also kind of speaking about how he, could hear both sides, and he did take the county council on its word that no homeless individuals would be moved into that hotel there in Laguna Hills. And so I was hoping that maybe Mr. Kim could speak to that. There are no individuals that are in there at this moment. Is that correct?
Yes, there are no individuals that are there at the moment. My understanding was we were planning to utilize the facility beginning today, but that's been delayed until the hearing on Monday. I didn't participate in the court hearing as I was here for the press conference, so I can't comment on what the judge said today.
Thank you.
And our next question will come from the line of Tony Zadidra with Orange County Register. Please go ahead.
Hi, this question is for Sheriff Barnes. He mentioned the 90-day ticker on the no bails practice. When would that 90 days start?
The 90-day, hi Tony, the 90 days I referenced was not when it starts. The order was effective immediately. The 90 days is when it ends, and it could be effective and valid up to 90 days after the emergency is lifted, which is concerning to me. Once we lift the emergency, in essence, we don't have to be addressing these issues, and why we would have a 3-month extension of a zero bail schedule that allows people to continue to be released or not brought to jail when we're already 38% down seems like it might be, it just creates unnecessary risk to the public. At some point, we have to get back to what our old normal was, and that means efficiently participating in a judicial system, and when appropriate, bringing people to jail and holding them in custody in a custodial environment. Those numbers will eventually need to trickle back up to probably where they were before once the courts get back up and operational and other means. The one thing that you mentioned and about the population, people probably don't realize this, but with the courts closed, how we were able to get our population down was a result of several different efforts. Efforts through what I did by some releases of low-level offenders who were coming up on their sentence expiration. Those who not coming to jail as frequently and being mitigated through that. But most of the people who are brought to my jail are brought through remand from the court, going to court, having their day in court a hearing, and having the judge rule to remand them to the custody of the sheriff, which means they come back to me in the evening after court closes, sometimes by the dozens or hundreds, depending on how the court process goes. So with the courts being closed, all these hearings that might have resulted in remands will eventually start happening again. People will be remanded, and the population of the jail will eventually return back to where it was. I just don't see the necessity for having a order, albeit the argument on whether it's went too far or not, but I'd argue that it definitely goes too far if it stays valid 90 days after the emergency has been mitigated. And Tony, for your peer who asked a question earlier on the time frame, the time frame in that reporting was March 16th to April 13th, 2019 to 2020. March 16th to April 13th. I think you were still speaking. I apologize.
No, I just asked. I wanted to ask. So, what do you mean by the emergency is lifted? Who would lift this emergency, and what does that mean?
Well, the emergency that we're under is a state of emergency. It's a local emergency and also a gubernatorial and national emergency from presidential proclamation. So, as if the governor were to issue his emergency at some point when he feels it's been mitigated, and unless there remains a local emergency, but my guess is that those orders will probably coincide as emergency is mitigated. That will mark the end of the emergency proclamation. And if those 90 days remain valid, that 90 days starts then. I'll say, for argument's sake, let's say the emergency is lifted on July 1st, and then it would be August, September, October, right? October 1st before it would be invalid, or 90 days from there. It's actual, not calendar months, but days. There's no necessity for it to remain 90 days beyond the point where the emergency is lifted. That's my point.
Okay.
At the moment, there are no further questions in queue.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and thank you for the members of the media who were here and asked questions. That concludes our press conference for today.